critical moment when our country needed her. Kamala couldn't have been more prepared to meet that moment, and she's met it every single day since. Yes. Oh, she's filling arenas in a way we haven't seen for years. She's building a remarkable campaign in record time, dominating her opponent so thoroughly in the debate, he was too scared to face her again. Kamala, she's putting herself out there fearlessly, facing down even her harshest critics. She's seeking out Republicans to find common ground. And unlike her opponent, she's not ducking interviews or cowering in safe spaces only with fawning audiences. No, she's showing us what a sane, stable leader looks like. She's not losing her train of thought or stumbling over her words. And she's doing it all with vigor and with grace. That's because Kamala Harris is a grown-up. And Lord knows we need a grown-up in the White House. Someone with the maturity and fresh ideas to keep moving our country forward. Kamala is the only candidate in this race who has outlined a clear set of policies, including focusing on lowering costs and reducing drug prices for all Americans, giving tax credits to first-time homebuyers, folks starting small businesses, and working families raising our kids. Let me tell you, it is a remarkable plan. And these remarkable last few months mirror the way Kamala has handled herself her entire life, fighting for working people and the vulnerable, first as a prosecutor, then as an attorney general, then as a U.S. senator, and now as our Vice President of the United States. Taking on the big banks, the transnational gangs and predatory for-profit colleges, and always doing it, holding her head high with warmth and dignity and class. So Michigan, do not buy into the lie that we do not know who Kamala is or what she stands for. This is someone who understands you, all of you, someone from a middle-class family raised mostly by her mom, like so many of us, leaning on her neighbors like we all do. That's what you want in a president, someone who gets you and will have your back. Take it from me. And I know good people. Kamala Harris is an extraordinary human being. She is an extraordinary candidate. And she will be an extraordinary president of the United States of America.
Welcome back, everybody, to The Deep Dive. So today we're diving into a speech that's been making headlines, one by former First Lady Michelle Obama.
Yeah, it seems like it's been getting a lot of attention.
You bet. You sent me a couple articles on it, and seems like she's really making a direct appeal to men in this one, especially around women's health and how it all ties into this election. Ready to unpack it.
Absolutely, yeah. Mrs. Obama coming back to the campaign trail, I mean, especially to focus on this, that's pretty significant. She doesn't really hold back either, gets personal and connects it all back to women's lived experiences.
Yeah, and I think that's what really struck me reading these articles is how candid she is. But before we get into all that, I got to ask, the articles mentioned she hasn't always been the biggest fan of politics, so what was it about this issue that made her decide to speak out now?
Well, she actually addresses that right in the speech. She says, and I quote, "Y'all know I hate politics."
Oh, yeah. I remember reading that.
But you can just tell from the articles, from her tone, that the Supreme Court's decision to overturn Roe v. Wade and the potential fallout from that for women's health care, that's really lit a fire under her. She's making the case that this election is a turning point, that the stakes for women are just incredibly high.
Yeah, and she gets really candid, right? talking about things like menstrual cramps and hot flashes. That's not your typical political speech.
Exactly. And that's what's so interesting here. She's using personal narrative, these vivid stories. It's not just this abstract policy debate. She's painting a real picture of what women's health concerns are like, using examples that anyone can relate to. She even talks about shivering on the operating table during a difficult delivery. I think she's really trying to connect with listeners, especially men, on a very human, very visceral level.
Yeah, it's almost as if she's talking to the men in the audience through their experiences with the women in their lives, wives, daughters, mothers. Like, hey, this could be your family we're talking about.
I think that's spot on. It's an appeal to empathy and understanding. By sharing these personal stories, she's bridging the gap between policy and what it actually means for women in their everyday lives.
And it's not just about abortion either, right?
Yeah.
She connects it to a bigger conversation about women's health care in general and the relationship they have with their doctors.
Right. She's very concerned about the potential for politics to interfere and erode that critical doctor-patient relationship. Her point is that women need to be empowered to make their own decisions about their bodies in consultation with their doctor, without politicians trying to step in and control everything.
And there's that part, too, where she criticizes the media and voters for holding Kamala Harris to a different standard than Donald Trump. I thought that was really interesting.
That's a key point, for sure. She really lays out the contrast, Kamala Harris has to be intelligent and articulate, have a clear set of policies, and never show too much anger. But those same expectations somehow don't apply to Trump. She points out that he has no understanding of policy, no honesty, no decency, no morals. And she even points out how the media and voters seem to just gloss over Trump's flaws while they're putting Harris under a microscope.
I'm deeply concerned, and I'm talking to everybody out there, that too many of us are still confused and buying into the lies and distortions from people who do not have our best interest at heart. So I want to address some of these concerns head on. Because when you lay out the options, this choice isn't even close. But whether it's online or in the media or in our social circles, there are folks who say they're not sure about Kamala. They accuse her of not providing enough policy detail. Some wonder, do we really know her? Is she too aggressive? Is she not aggressive enough? There are folks sowing seeds of doubt about whether she's who she appears to be. Now, don't get me wrong. Voters have every right to ask hard questions of any candidate seeking office. But can someone tell me why we are once again holding Kamala to a higher standard than her opponent? We expect her to be intelligent and articulate, to have a clear set of policies, to never show too much anger, to prove time and time again that she belongs. But for Trump, we expect nothing at all. No understanding of policy, no ability to put together a coherent argument, no honesty, no decency, no morals. Instead, too many people are willing to write off his childish, mean-spirited antics by saying, well, Trump's just being Trump, rather than question his horrible behavior. Some folks think he's funny.
And the crowd loved it, right? I mean, you could really sense that this was hitting home for people.
Absolutely. It speaks to a bigger conversation we're having about gender and leadership. Why are women often held to a different standard, usually a higher standard? What does that mean for women who want to be leaders? These are the questions that Mrs. Obama is bringing front and center.
Okay, so let's talk about how she addresses men directly. There are some really powerful lines that stood out to me, like men in the arena and take our lives seriously.
Oh, absolutely. What I find so interesting is her directness. She acknowledges that men might not fully get the anxieties that women have around reproductive health, but she's challenging them to try to really listen and to take our lives seriously. It's a direct call for empathy and for men to become allies in this fight.
So just imagine the profound effects for all of us if Donald Trump wins this election. In states that are already putting abortion bans into effect, his FDA could further outlaw patchwork systems of telehealth appointments and mail-order pills, thereby eliminating the last remaining protections for women in those states. He could take actions that effectively ban abortion nationwide, which would put all of us in danger, no matter what state we live in. We will see more doctors hesitating or shying away from providing life-saving treatments because they are worried about being arrested. More medical students reconsidering even pursuing women's health at all. More OB/GYN clinics without enough doctors to meet demand, closing their doors, leaving untold numbers of women in communities throughout this country without a place to go for basic gynecological care, which in turn will leave millions of us at risk of undiagnosed medical issues like cervical and uterine cancers. This is real. So do you think Donald Trump is thinking about the consequences for the millions of women who will be living in medical deserts? Does anyone think he has the emotional maturity and foresight to come up with a plan to protect us? Y'all, we are teetering on the edge. Even before these state bans, America was already lagging behind every other wealthy nation on measures like maternal mortality and paid leave. So we could be right back to the days before Roe, which many young people here don't even remember. The days when abortion wasn't as safe as it is today. The days when the number of mothers of color dying in childbirth was 30 to 40% higher than when it was under Roe. So to the men who love us, let me just try to paint a picture of what it will feel like if America, the wealthiest nation on earth, keeps revoking basic care from its women, and how it will affect every single woman in your life. Your girlfriend could be the one in legal jeopardy if she needs a pill from out of state or overseas, or if she has to travel across state lines because the local clinic closed up. Your wife or mother could be the ones at higher risk of dying from undiagnosed cervical cancer because they have no access to regular gynecological care. Your daughter could be the one too terrified to call the doctor if she's bleeding during an unexpected pregnancy. Your niece could be the one miscarrying in her bathtub after the hospital turned her away. And this will not just affect women, it will affect you and your sons. The devastating consequences of teen pregnancy won't just be borne by young girls, but also by the young men who are the fathers. They too will have their dreams of going to college, their entire futures totally upended by an unwanted pregnancy. If you and your partner are expecting a child, you will be right by her side at the checkups, terrified if her blood pressure is too high, or if there's an issue with the placenta, or if the ultrasound shows that the embryo was implanted in the wrong place, and the doctors aren't sure that they can intervene to keep the woman you love safe. If your wife is shivering and bleeding on the operating room table during a routine delivery gone bad, her pressure dropping as she loses more and more blood, or some unforeseen infection spreads and her doctors aren't sure if they can act, you will be the one praying that it's not too late. You will be the one pleading for somebody, anybody, to do something. And then there is the tragic but very real possibility that in the worst case scenario, you just might be the one holding flowers at the funeral. You might be the one left to raise your children alone. See, these are just some of the ways women die during childbirth. And I don't want to be a downer, y'all. But in many cases, there is no warning, and things go bad very quickly. And when it happens, every second of hesitation or delay can lead to devastating outcomes. So I am asking y'all from the core of my being to take our lives seriously. Please, do not hands of politicians, mostly men, who have no clue or do not care about what we as women are going through, who don't fully grasp the broad-reaching health implications that their misguided policies will have on our health outcomes. The only people who have standing to make these decisions are women with the advice of their doctors. We are the ones with the knowledge and experience to know what we need. So please, please do not hand our fates over to the likes of Trump, who knows nothing about us, who has shown deep contempt for us. Because a vote for him is a vote against us, against our health, against our worth. And let me tell you all, to think that the men that we love could be either unaware or indifferent to our plight is simply heartbreaking. It is a sad statement about our value as women in this world. It is both a setback in our quest for equity and a huge blow to our country's standing as a world leader on issues of women's health and gender equality. So fellas, before you cast your votes, ask yourselves, what side of history do you want to be on? A lot of angry, disillusioned people out there, upset with the slow pace of change. And I get it. It is reasonable to be frustrated. We all know we have a lot more work to do in this country. But to anyone out there thinking about sitting out this election or voting for Donald Trump or a third-party candidate in protest because you're fed up, let me warn you, your rage does not exist in a vacuum. If we don't get this election right, your wife, your daughter, your mother, we as women will become collateral damage to your rage. So, are you as men prepared to look into the eyes of the women and children you love and tell them that you supported this assault on our safety? And to the women listening, we have every right to demand that the men in our lives do better by us. We have to use our voices to make these choices clear to the men that we love. Our lives are worth more than their anger and disappointment. And we are more than just baby-making vessels. And if you are a woman who lives in a household of men that don't listen to you or value your opinion, just remember that your vote is a private matter. Regardless of the political views of your partner, you get to choose. You get to use your judgment and cast your vote for yourself and the women in your life. Remember, women, standing up for what is best for us can make the difference in this election. So let us use our voices in these final days to make it plain to the men in our lives that we need to stand not with Trump, but with us. We need them to vote for the only candidate in this race who will protect our lives. We need them to vote for Kamala Harris. Kamala, she will fight to restore our reproductive freedoms and defend our health. Kamala will fight for our access to life-saving emergency care and maternal care in every state. Kamala will veto any abortion ban or bill that restricts access to contraception or IVF. Kamala will expand access to birth control and abortion pills. And she will do all of this not because she's a woman, but because she's a decent human being. She will do this because she cares about the lives of people other than herself. And that's really what this election is about, Michigan. This isn't just about what we have an obligation to say no to. It's about what we have the opportunity to say yes to. And we can elect someone who has the experience, the character, and the strength to look at all these challenges and still see a brighter day on the other side. Kamala Harris will see us, all of us. Kamala Harris will listen to us, all of us. She will protect our freedom. She'll stand up for all of our lives. She will have our backs for the folks trying to get ahead and those just trying to get by. And in doing so, she will usher in a new generation of American leadership and send the ugliness of Donald Trump and his politics back where it belongs, the past. But Michigan, she cannot do any of this alone. So I'm asking you one last time, let us not just sit around and complain. Let's do something. If your brother or your son or boyfriend needs to hear your perspective, are you willing to talk to them? Are you willing to send a video of what I've just said? Are you willing to do something? If you have an aunt who's thinking about sitting this one out or voting for a third party, are you willing to have an uncomfortable conversation? Are you willing to do something? If you have an extra hour or extra weekend, are you willing to knock on doors and talk to your neighbors? Are you willing to do something? Look, Michigan, we've just got 10 more days to make it happen. 10 more days to wave goodbye to the incompetence and hatred and division. 10 more days to welcome in a leader with the character and the heart and the strength worthy of the office she seeks and worthy of the country that we all love. Michigan, let's give Kamala everything we've got. Can we get this done? Can we get this done, Michigan? We need you, every last one of you. Get this done. Get this done.
Delivered by someone incredibly influential.
Yeah.
Why this message? Why NW? What's the strategy?
Well, the timing is crucial here. We're only 10 days out from a very tight election. Michigan, where she gave this speech, is a major battleground state. And Vice President Harris is working hard to mobilize key voter groups, especially women who are really worried about the future of abortion rights and their overall safety.
So Michelle Obama steps in with this passionate plea, putting a human face on these issues. Seems like a pretty calculated move to energize the base and maybe even sway some undecided voters.
Right. And it's not just about winning an election either. It's about shaping the entire conversation around women's health and rights. Mrs. Obama is using her platform to bring these concerns to the forefront to make sure they're part of the national dialogue.
So we've covered a lot in this first part of our deep dive. We talked about the context, the power of her personal stories, the focus on women's health care, and that really sharp critique of the double standard women in leadership face. But there's still more to unpack, right?
Absolutely. In the next part, we're going to look closer at the specific language Mrs. Obama uses to connect with men, explore the political implications of all this, and examine those bigger questions she raises about empathy and its potential to actually drive change. So yeah, there were some phrases that really stuck with me, like when she talks about men in the arena. What did you make of that? That one's really interesting. It's a clear reference to Teddy Roosevelt's famous speech, the one about daring greatly, being in the thick of things. She's basically saying, men, if you want to be real leaders, you got to step up and be a part of this. Don't shy away from tough conversations, especially when they affect women.
Yeah, it's almost like a challenge, right? Like, don't just sit on the sidelines, get in the game.
Exactly. And then she follows that up with, I don't expect any man to fully grasp how vulnerable this makes us feel, to understand the complexities of our reproductive health experiences. She's acknowledging that men might not get it, but she's still urging them to try.
I noticed she used us a lot, too. Like, she's creating this sense of solidarity among women, but also inviting men to be a part of that understanding.
That's a great point. It's like she's building a bridge between women's lived experiences and men's understanding of those experiences. It's not about expecting men to walk in women's shoes exactly, but more about trying to understand their perspective, their fears, their needs.
And then she ties it all back to the election, right?
Yeah.
It's not just about understanding. It's about actually taking action, making choices at the ballot box.
Absolutely. She's making it clear that this election is about more than just who sits in the Oval Office. It's about protecting women's rights, their health, their autonomy. She's really urging voters, and men in particular, to consider the real-life consequences of the choices they make.
What's interesting, too, is that she doesn't shy away from directly criticizing Donald Trump, calling him out for, quote, his deep contempt for us, and warning that a vote for him is a vote against women, against their value in society.
That's right, and that kind of direct approach may not sit well with everyone. It could alienate some voters, but it seems strategically designed to energize her base, create a sense of urgency, especially among women who are already leaning towards Harris.
It's a powerful message, especially in this political climate. It really seems to be tapping into a lot of the anxieties and fears, particularly among women.
You're right, and that's what makes it so compelling. It's not just a speech. It's speaking to a very specific moment in time when women's rights and freedoms feel especially vulnerable.
So we've got the personal stories, the political arguments, the direct appeal to men. But this bigger question keeps coming back to me. Can empathy actually drive political change?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? I mean, it's one thing to evoke empathy to make people feel something, but can you translate that feeling into concrete action, into votes, into changes in policy? It's tricky.
It's easy to get cynical, especially these days. But I have to admit, there's something about her approach, Michelle Obama's approach, that feels different. Maybe it's her authenticity or willingness to be vulnerable, the way she connects with people on a human level.
I agree. There's a realness to her, a genuineness you can't fake. And maybe, just maybe, that's what we need right now, that genuine human connection. Maybe that's what can bridge the divides and move us forward on these really critical issues.
You know, we've talked a lot about what she said and how she said it, but I'm curious about the reaction. What are people saying?
Well, the articles mention that the crowd at the rally was incredibly receptive. Lots of cheers, especially when she called out the double standard women face in leadership.
Sounds like it was a pretty electric atmosphere.
Oh, definitely. And keep in mind, this rally was in Michigan, a key battleground state. That energy and enthusiasm there, that could be a really good sign for the Harris campaign.
What about media coverage? How's this speech been received more broadly in the political world?
It's still early, but initial coverage seems pretty positive. A lot of commentators are praising Mrs. Obama for her honesty, her eloquence, and her ability to connect with voters on a personal level.
So it sounds like the speech has definitely struck a chord. But the bigger question is, will it have a lasting impact? Will it actually influence how people vote in this election?
That's what we'll be watching closely in these next 10 days leading up to November 7th. Will this speech actually get people to the polls? Will it shift the conversation around women's health and rights? Only time will tell.
I'm also thinking about the broader implications of what she said. It's not just about this one election. It's about how we treat women in our society.
Exactly. This goes way beyond partisan politics. It's a call for a deeper understanding of women's experiences, a call for empathy, respect, and equality. And that's a conversation that needs to continue long after the votes are counted.
All right, we're back for the final part of our deep dive into Michelle Obama's speech. You know, we've talked about a lot, but I want to get back to something you mentioned earlier, this idea of empathy actually being a driving force for change in politics.
Yeah, it's kind of a radical idea, isn't it? Can we really overcome these political divisions, create real change, just by understanding and sharing how we feel?
It almost seems too simple, you know? Like in a world of all this political strategy and policy debates, can tapping into emotions really make a difference?
It's definitely a different approach than what we usually see in politics. But think about the impact Mrs. Obama's speech has had. People are talking about it, debating it. It's clearly resonated with a lot of people. Maybe there is something to this more human-centered way of doing things.
And she really put herself out there, sharing those very personal stories. It made everything feel so much more real, more urgent.
There's a real power in being vulnerable like that. I mean, when someone's willing to open up, share their truth, it invites us to do the same, right? It creates a space for connection, for understanding, and that can be the foundation for real change.
It's like she's saying, look, this is what's at stake, not just for me, but for all women. And that seems to connect with people regardless of where they stand politically.
Exactly. She's not just appealing to our heads, to logic and reason. She's tapping into something much deeper, that sense of shared humanity. And that's what makes this speech so powerful.
So the big question, can empathy actually lead to political change? What do you think?
Tough to say for sure. But I think Mrs. Obama's speech offers a little bit of hope. It shows us that connecting with people on a personal level, sharing stories, appealing to empathy, it can actually make a difference.
Yeah, and it reminds us that politics isn't just about abstract ideas and policies. It's about real people, real lives, and the choices we make affect all those lives.
And sometimes it's those personal stories, those moments of vulnerability that cut through all the noise and force us to really listen.
So where do we go from here? I mean, we've unpacked the main points, analyzed the language, considered the political implications. What's the takeaway for our listeners?
I think the biggest takeaway is this: pay attention. Pay attention to the stories people are telling, to the voices being raised, to what's actually at stake. This election is about so much more than just choosing a president. It's about the future of our country and what kind of society we want to live in. It's about the choices we make every day and how those choices affect the people around us. And that includes all of you listening.
And it's a decision that affects all of us, regardless of gender. So as we head into the final days before the election, I think it's important to keep those words from Michelle Obama in mind. Take our lives seriously.
Absolutely. And remember, this is just one piece of a much larger puzzle. So keep learning, keep asking questions, and most importantly, make your voice heard. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive.
We'll see you next time.